Hey everybody, I just got back from driving the all-new 2020 Subaru Outback, and I have to say that I was definitely impressed. However, unfortunately, I can't say anything more about that until July 29th when the embargo lifts. Until then, let's instead talk about how the Outback compares with the rest of the competition as far as the overall specifications go. First, we're going to talk about how it stacks up. What exactly is the Outback? Is it a wagon? Is it a crossover, etc.? Then we're going to talk about pricing. The Outback has grown a little bit for this generation. It's now 191.3 inches long, making it on the long side of the comparative segment. That brings us along to what is the Outback? Some people want to call this a crossover, some want to call it an SUV, some want to call it a station wagon. What is it? I don't know if that really matters. What is it to you? Let me know down there in the comment section below. To me, this is a lifted off-road station wagon because forward from this area, it is identical to the all-new 2020 Subaru Legacy. So the interior, the dashboard, the driver's seat, etc., the front doors, front quarter panels, etc., those are all the same as the four-door sedan. Back here, we have a very traditional wagon profile, not the more upright profile that we see in something like a Subaru Forester or the Subaru Ascent. So this is quite different than something like a Santa Fe, a Murano, a Blazer, a Ford Edge, etc. But this definitely ends up in that category because of overall price, overall interior room, and then the overall size of the vehicle. This is about the same length overall as the Chevy Blazer. An interesting point of trivia is that the Outback is the only wagon variant in North America that outsells its sedan counterpart. Again, this is the best-selling Subaru on this continent. Compared to something like an Edge, a Passport, or even a Grand Cherokee, we have a more reclined seating position in this vehicle, and overall the body feels a little bit longer and a little bit closer to the ground. That puts the center of gravity a little bit lower than most of its direct competition and really helps improve handling in the Outback. A lot of folks love the Outback because it handles more like a sedan, less like a crossover, but has all of the advantages of a more rugged off-road vehicle. We have ground clearance in this model at 8.7 inches. That is definitely above the average for this particular segment. In fact, if you want more ground clearance than this, you're going to have to get something like a Jeep Grand Cherokee, and that's going to be an awful lot more expensive. Under the hood, which as you can see opens very, very wide, sort of like a snake unhinging its jaw, we find two different engines. First up, we have a 2.5-liter boxer engine that's a new design shared with the Subaru Forester. That produces 182 horsepower and 176 pound-feet of torque. We then have an optional 2.4-liter turbo engine that's shared with the Subaru Ascent. That produces 260 horsepower and bumps things up to 277 pound-feet of torque. Both engines are mated to a standard continuously variable transmission, no manual transmissions available here, and standard all-wheel drive. The standard all-wheel drive system is important to remember when comparing the Outback or really any modern Subaru aside from the BRZ to the competition, because none of the competition, including the Grand Cherokee, come with all-wheel drive standard. As you'd expect, fuel economy is best with the base engine, getting us 29 miles per gallon combined, again, even though we have that standard all-wheel drive system, and things drop down to 26 if you choose the 2.4-liter turbo. One of the design goals for the Subaru Outback was to give us the fuel economy that we find in a compact crossover and the overall capability that we find in a mid-size two-row crossover. A roomier back seat is definitely a reason you might want to look at the Outback over the average compact crossover like a CR-V or a RAV4. With this front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, you can see I have about 6 or 7 inches of legroom left. With 82.3 inches of combined legroom, this is one of the larger and more generous interiors in this segment, very similar to the Murano and the Santa Fe. That means that you're going to find more legroom back here than in something like the Honda Passport. We also find a little bit more width in this than something like a CR-V or RAV4, so adults are going to be more comfortable in this back middle seat. And I have about 1.5 inches of overall headroom, even though this middle seat is higher off the ground than the outboard seating positions. Moving all the way over to the right side of the vehicle, you'll really notice the overall legroom in here because the front seat is all the way back in its tracks, and I still have about 4 inches of legroom left. The rear seats recline. We have a separate lever over here on the side of the seat that makes the recline mechanism function. That's separate from the release latch for the 60/40 folding rear seat back design. Behind this very dusty hatch, we find 37.1 cubic feet of storage space, or if you calculate it using the newer calculation method, 32.5. The key thing to know about the Outback when you're comparing the spec sheet to the spec sheet on the competition is that Subaru is using a different calculation method for getting us the cargo capacity back here, and that gives us the smaller number of 32.5. So on their website, that's the number you're going to see. But Subaru told us that if you calculated it using the older method, which is what Honda, Jeep, Nissan, Kia, Hyundai, etc., they're all using that older method, then this would come in at 37.1. Any way you slice it, we have a pretty decent cargo area back here. Compared to most of the direct competition, the Outback's cargo area is a little bit deeper and a little bit squatter than most of them, just due to the overall shape and profile of the Outback. So that means that you'll be able to put different cargo in the vehicles. Longer cargo items right back here in this storage area, slightly taller items in something like a Honda Passport. The lifted wagon format has a number of other advantages. So for instance, when we take a look at overall ground clearance, we have 8.7 inches of ground clearance, but the Outback doesn't feel as high off the ground as some of the competition, some of those other crossovers out there. Because of the more reclined seating position, it is a little bit easier to get in and out of the Outback than some of the competition. And that also helps reduce the overall center of gravity in the Outback because the body isn't as tall, there's not as much steel up higher, so that helps drive the weight a little bit lower. And overall weight is definitely lower in the Outback versus most of the competition. You'll see here that even though we have a compact crossover on this list, which is significantly shorter than the Outback, it's 11 inches shorter overall, it's a little bit closer to the Outback in terms of overall curb weight than something like a Jeep Grand Cherokee. The Jeep Grand Cherokee weighs almost 1,000 pounds more. Now, the curb weight figures on your screen are for the lower end engine option in these alternatives here and all-wheel drive. So we're not talking about front-wheel drive versus all-wheel drive here. All of these are all-wheel drive entries. The only exception on this list is the Chevy Blazer, where you cannot put all-wheel drive on the base engine. So that particular model, we are talking about the V6 because that's the first one you can get all-wheel drive on, and that's the best way to take a look at this compared to the Outback. Remember that the Outback has standard all-wheel drive. The light curb weight and the continuously variable transmission are the big reason that as we look at the lower end chart on your screen, we get excellent fuel economy in all models. Whether we're talking about the optional turbocharged engine or the base naturally aspirated engine, we get 29 miles per gallon. Remember, again, these are all-wheel drive figures here. The only exception is that asterisk right there on the Blazer because you cannot get all-wheel drive with the base four-cylinder engine. Subaru decided to keep the price tag pretty close to 2019, so the 2020 Outback starts only a few $100s more, $26,645. That model has a two-screen infotainment system rather than the one large screen that we see in every other Outback in America. Some key takeaways here is that the base model does not get alloy wheels, and even the premium trim does not have standard keyless entry and keyless go. That is part of an option package. However, the premium trim and all the rest of the Outbacks do have that large 11.6-inch infotainment screen. That's a big deal in the mainstream segment because outside of this vehicle, if you want a big infotainment screen, you're going to have to buy a Tesla or something like a Ram pickup truck, and only in the top-end trims. There are two different option packages available on that premium trim. One bumps you up to the keyless entry and keyless go. The other one adds navigation and the sunroof. Then we have the limited trim and the touring trim, both available with either the 2.5-liter engine or the 2.4-liter turbocharged engine. That's why you can see the XT trims down lower. XT means turbocharged for Subaru. We then have the Onyx XT trim, which is new for 2020. That's trying to target younger buyers with blacked out trim all the way around the vehicle. And we don't have the same kind of feature content in that model that we find in limited or touring. That's why the price tag is a little bit lower. So if you want the turbocharged engine, your base price is going to be $34,895. Some outlets have already said that the turbocharged version of the Outback is a little too expensive, but I don't agree with them. And here's why. When we take a look at the minimum point of entry for all-wheel drive in the competition, that's the chart on your screen right here. You'll see the Murano, $32,970 versus the Onyx XT at $34,895. So it's not a pretty big bump there. It'll actually cost you more in a Chevy Blazer to get all-wheel drive because you have to get the V6, you have to step up a little bit from that base model, and that's going to be $36,000. Grand Cherokee, $34,495, pretty similar to what we see in the Onyx XT. Another key thing to keep in mind is that we don't have the same kind of power-to-weight ratio in most of these entries that we see in the top-end XT trim of the Outback. We can't talk about performance just yet. We will have that for you on July 29th, but keep that figure in mind. The amount of pounds you're moving around for the amount of torque and amount of horsepower that each of these engines delivers. As you can see, the Outback has some pretty compelling specifications. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. I think that just judging by the numbers here, it's no wonder that the Outback is one of the best-selling entries in this segment. Only the Jeep Grand Cherokee currently outsells the Outback in America, and the Grand Cherokee does that with 4 or 5 different engine options. There's a diesel one, there's a V6, several different V8s, etc. We get the options of air suspension, etc. But excluding that, just counting the number of Grand Cherokee models that would directly compare to the Outback, I think that the Outback might actually outsell those Grand Cherokee trims. One of the big reasons for that is the high value and low price tag we see in the Outback. Remember that when you're comparing entries in this segment, keep in mind that the Outback again has that standard all-wheel drive system that's very, very unique here, and that puts it much closer to entries like the Toyota RAV4 in terms of overall price tag comparison. So for instance, the Toyota RAV4 is a little bit more expensive, oddly enough, than the Outback if you were to add all-wheel drive to the base trim of the RAV4, and it's a compact crossover. It's theoretically in a different segment. While you're typing down there in the comment section below, also let me know what you feel about the top-end Touring XT trim at $40,000 essentially. Do you think that's a good deal in this segment or not? If you're shopping about $40,000, would you take some of the other options? The overall interior design is basically the same as the base model at $26,645. Subaru has definitely done a lot of work to try and make the overall interior feel more premium in the Outback, but I think that certain versions of the Grand Cherokee, even though it's a little bit older, still feel more premium. Now, when we take a look at this list of competitors here, however, I do think that the Outback's interior is more premium than the RAV4, than the Passport, the Blazer, the Edge, the Santa Fe, or the Nissan Murano as well. While you're commenting down there, also be sure and let me know what you think about the format of this video. Is this something that we should do again when we have a first drive video and the embargo date is a number of days out, or should we just never try this kind of video again? Also be sure and find us over at facebook.com/AlexNauto so you can see what we're driving this week, and of course, see what we're driving on launch events just like the Subaru Outback. You would have been able to comment in real time as we were driving the vehicle around. I'll see you later.